In the last 9 games of the 2022 season, the Baltimore Ravens emerged as the best defense in the NFL. The Seahawks did nearly the same thing under the same coach in Mike Macdonald. Could it be deja vu in 2025 compared to the 2023 Ravens? We're going to be breaking that all down here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks.
You are Locked On Seahawks, your daily Seattle Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Greetings, 12. This is Corbin Smith, the host of the Locked On Seahawks podcast, your daily Seahawks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Glad to be joined here, as always, by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s tuning in. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Whether you're listening down in Sacramento, California, or in Cheyenne, Wyoming, this is going to be a jam-packed episode. We are going to be diving into a mailbag. We've got biggest deficiencies still to look at for the Seahawks as they head full steam ahead towards training camp, and some historical context. Can the Seahawks match the 2023 Ravens, who are coached by the same defensive mastermind? All this coming up on a jam-packed episode, so let's get to it. Now for your lead story here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. Mike Macdonald first became an NFL defensive coordinator with the Ravens in 2022. He was with the Michigan Wolverines the year before as their defensive coordinators with the Ravens as an assistant for a number of years before then. Goes back to Baltimore. And Rob, the first 8 games were pretty rough for Mike Macdonald's defense that year, including giving up 42 points to the Miami Dolphins in a Week 2 loss. That defense was struggling. And then they traded for Roquan Smith. They acquired him from the Chicago Bears, and the all-pro linebackers seemed to have a ripple effect on the rest of that defense. In the second half, under 15 points per game allowed on defense, first in the NFL during that last 9 games. And they were utterly dominant down the stretch to get back to the postseason. Macdonald had a very similar season in Seattle in his first year as a head coach, down all the way to acquiring a veteran linebacker at the trade deadline. And it's crazy when you compare the 2022 Ravens to the 2024 Seahawks, because the parallels don't end with the fact that both teams traded for a linebacker.
No, and I think that's very well said. I think that from a statistical standpoint, there are just so many parallels that should have Seahawks fans very excited. I mean, I'm quite literally wearing the shirt that I bought from the last time that the Seahawks won the Super Bowl, in part because I'm excited about the parallels that you can draw between the current Seahawks, or at least what they were able to do a year ago, and what I expect that they're going to be able to do this upcoming season, and what Mike Macdonald was able to do, as you mentioned, as the defensive coordinator of the Baltimore Ravens when they made a Super Bowl run of their own. Corbin, rather than talking about the statistical comparisons here, I just think that the vibe, I think that the different types of players, the waves of players, so to speak, from Seattle, of course, that Seattle has here, I think are some of the biggest reasons why that you can draw some parallels between these two different franchises. Just because of the fact that I just think that Seattle doesn't have a superstar, an all-pro caliber player. Maybe Leonard Williams is that guy, but it's not just Leonard Williams. It is Jay Reed. It is Byron Murphy II. It is the pass rushers on the outside. There's not just one guy that if he happens to get injured, then your whole season is thrown out the window. To me, that is one of the most encouraging signs, is how Seattle developed over the course of last season. I expect much bigger things, better things, stingier things on defense in this upcoming season.
And really, the reason that this topic is getting approached, it isn't just the stats. But again, I'm going to look at the stats because to me, the parallels are crazy. Like, this is the last 9 games, Rob, for the 2022 Ravens versus the 2024 Seahawks. Both teams created 10 turnovers. The Ravens had 25 sacks. The Seahawks had 24. So nearly mirroring them there. Passing yards per game, 201 for the Ravens, 215 for the Seahawks. They were both in the upper echelon in the NFL in that category in their last 9 games. Ravens gave up 14.6 points per game. The Seahawks gave up 17.6, which is still outstanding for the last 9 games. Really, the only big discrepancy is the rushing yards per game, and the Seahawks were more than 50 yards better than what the Ravens were in that category. So I think when you consider the stats and the fact that Mike Macdonald now, after this draft, getting Nick Emenwari, they bring in DeMarcus Lawrence in free agency. 13 of the 14 players that had the most snaps on defense last year are still under contract. Like, that is rare continuity to have on offense or defense in the NFL in this period in the league. To have that many guys returning, having Ernest Jones and Jaron Reed re-signed, that continuity, some fun young guys that you're bringing in that you're excited about, including Emenwari. It just feels like the parallels in terms of the Ravens and Seahawks. The Ravens had tons of continuity in 2023. They had most of their players returning. They did lose Patrick Queen, but that was after the 2023 season. So they had almost all their pieces in place. Matt Abuke was entering the last year of his contract. I mean, they had all those pieces in place for them to be able to be dominant. The only real addition they had, and this is interesting, it was Jadeveon Clowney. Very similar to DeMarcus Lawrence being brought in, a veteran that can be an every down guy, that can stuff the run, hard-nosed, play multiple alignments. The parallels just continue. And so I think that when you look at the confidence and just when you watch the OTAs just yesterday, the amount of intentionality that there was in everything that they were doing on the field. You have all your veterans on defense for the most part. They're at least there, and most of them were participating. Leonard Williams, Jaron Reed. Like, there's a buy-in, and Devin Witherspoon was talking about that. Everybody is bought in on the standard that they have set here. They have set this standard, and it isn't we want to be a top 5 defense. It's we want to be number 1. And oh, by the way, the 2023 Ravens, Rob, they were the only team, the first and only team in NFL history to finish first in points allowed, first in sacks, and first in turnovers in the same season. So that's extremely lofty expectations if you're wanting to match that. But you listen to Jaron Reed, you listen to Devin Witherspoon, and just the vibes, as you mentioned, I love that word, coming out of the VMAC, even in an OTA yesterday. Like, they are not just dealing with those expectations. They are embracing them. They want to have that on their back. They want that pressure because defense wins championships, as Jaron Reed said. Offense wins games. Defense wins championships. They want that to be on their back, and they want to deliver. And that just seems so much like that Baltimore Ravens team a couple years ago that Macdonald coached, that, again, first ever that was number 1 overall in points allowed, sacks, and turnovers. Can it be deja vu? I think if Seattle even gets close to accomplishing that, it is going to be a really fun season in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what I think that is going to be. I mean, just a couple of days ago when we were, kind of going out through the entire schedule and pontificating as far as what we thought that the Seahawks record was going to be. I will force our very loyal listeners and watchers, and thank you as always, to go back. But, I thought that the Seahawks were going to go 13-4, which is an unbelievable season, obviously. But I do think that the talent on this team, I think that the vibe, again, I think that the schedule matches up. And I think that there are some parallels between this current Seahawks squad and that Baltimore Ravens defense that was, look, the offense was good. The defense is what carried the load. And that's what I think is going to be the case here as well. I just think that when you talked about Justin Matabuke, for example, who, of course, was entering his contract year, exploded for the Baltimore Ravens, I would counter that with a guy like a Tariq Woolen, a guy like a Boye Mafe, who are entering their respective contract years that I also expect to absolutely explode. I think that Tariq Woolen is going to wind up leading this team in interceptions. I think that Boye Mafe has a very good chance of leading this team in sacks. And it's not just because of the fact that I think that they are both talented players, but we all know the way that a contract year can motivate players. So, again, Corbin, I just think that this is a squad that is set to pop. And I'm excited to kind of see, because I think that the schedule allows them to have some fairly easy matchups to be able to get some momentum going. And once you start to believe that, I think like those Baltimore Ravens, that there is going to be an awful lot of success, an awful lot of reason for Seahawks fans to be excited.
When we come back, we're going to be tackling your questions in our weekly mailbag segment, Seahawks, NFL, you name it. Going to be jumping in head first. That'll be coming up next here on our Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. This episode is brought your way by our friends over at LinkedIn Jobs. As a small business owner, I run the Emerald City Spectrum. Your work doesn't end when the clock hits 5. Your business is always on your mind, which means when it's time to hire, you need a partner that works just as hard as you do. That's where LinkedIn Jobs comes in. When you clock out, LinkedIn clocks in. LinkedIn makes it easy to post your job for free, share it with your network, and get qualified candidates on one place. LinkedIn's new features can help you write job descriptions and then quickly get your job in front of the right people with deep candidate insights. And here's a pro tip: add the hashtag hiring frame to your profile picture to double your reach to qualified candidates. No wonder 72% of small businesses say LinkedIn helps them find high quality hires. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL. That's linkedin.com/LockedOnNFL to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Welcome back to the Tuesday edition of Locked On Seahawks. I'm your host, Corbin Smith. He's Rob Rang. A special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Since we had a jam-packed OTA takeaway show yesterday, we are going to open up our mailbag here on Tuesday. Let's jump into it, Rob. And we got tons of questions from our valued listeners. And again, as always, thank you to all the 12s for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate it. Let's open up the mailbag, shall we, Rob? The first question here going to be for you, and it is going to be coming from Cody. It's Cody Vet 9 on X. I understand the offense is heavily revamped, but with what was brought in and the defense only going to get better, why are the Seahawks rated so low nationally? This seems to be something that happens a lot, and everybody wants to point to location. But, Rob, it does feel like this year it isn't necessarily that, people aren't noticing the Seahawks. It is just a lot of people are really down on the moves that they made this offseason.
Well, I think that they are down. The national media are down on some of the moves that Seattle has made. I think that there is just a lot of skepticism. And frankly, I have some of those concerns. Can Sam Darnold, duplicate the success that he had a year ago? Is Cooper Kupp going to be healthy? Do they have the depth at the wide receiver position? Is this offensive line that has just been atrocious for so long finally going to be able to figure it all out? In my opinion, yes, and yes. And again, I think that the Seattle defense is going to do exactly what the Baltimore defense did a couple of years ago and just be flat out dominant and be able to allow an offense to mature, get better as the season goes on. So yes, all those folks out there that are, the betting out there that is basically saying the Seahawks are going to be last in the NFC West. Look, I can't say bet heavy, because I think the Seahawks are going to do a lot of the very impressive things this year. I just think that the talent is there, like the schedule is there to have an awful lot of success, more than some of the national pundits out there are suggesting.
Our next question coming from Chevy Guy on X. I'm a Dodge guy, but I digress. Do you see Jadeveon Clowney coming back to Seattle? If you listened to our show last week, I already made this prediction. I think Jadeveon Clowney will be a Seahawk at the beginning of August at the latest. I think he will be in a Seahawks uniform. I don't know that there's going to be a big trade, but bringing in a guy like that when you don't have to give anything up and they've got tons of cap space, Rob, I think there's more, maybe there's a world they trade for Jalen Ramsey and they sign Jadeveon Clowney. They have the cap space to do it, but I think Clowney will be back in the Seahawks uniform. I think Mike Macdonald loves him. And look, they like having 5 edge guys. Right now you've got 4, and then there's a big drop-off from that. I think Jadeveon Clowney ends up in the Seahawks uniform. That is my prediction. So I think there's a very good chance that he's back in Seattle. Adam Wilkinson, if Drew Lock continues to impress and Sam Darnold seems uncertain, do you see any possibility of this becoming a true quarterback competition, or is it Sam's job regardless because of the contract? Well, we know how Mike Macdonald feels about this question.
We do. Mike Macdonald was asked basically the exact same question here in a local Seattle radio, and he kind of poo-pooed the idea and basically, and I'm paraphrasing here, of course, because Sam's our quarterback, and that's what I believe as well. Look, I'm a true Lock fan. Let me be very clear about that. I do believe that Drew Lock is among the 32 best quarterbacks in all of the NFL. I think the Seahawks are very fortunate that they have him as the backup. But let's be clear, Sam Darnold is your guy. And I do believe that the Super Bowl is your goal with Sam Darnold. I think the playoffs are your goal with Drew Lock.
Yeah, that's really a good point. It depends on what you think the upside is. And look, this is not Matt Flynn 2.0. If you compare salaries based on inflation, it's not. Like, it was basically a third of the contract that Sam Darnold's got that they gave for Matt Flynn. So it's not comparable. You're comparing apples to oranges. So look, we don't want to be called crazy guys, even though we are. If we asked Mike Macdonald, he would have responded the same way. You guys are crazy. That's the way that he views it. So I don't think that's happening. Our next question here from Sean T. Who are your top 5 defensive linemen of all time for the Seahawks? Oh, come on. You got to put me on the spot with that, especially with the top 50 Seahawks coming. Look, number 1 is easy. It's Cortez Kennedy. Big Cortez, easily the best defensive lineman that the Seahawks have had. And look, this question's kind of vague because it keeps, is it defensive ends? The outside linebackers get to be involved. So I'm just going to keep it the big guys that had a hand in the dirt. And so Cortez Kennedy at number 1 for me. And then I'm going to have Jacob Green at number 2. I think Jacob Green should be in the Hall of Fame. I've been saying that for years. I think he and Sean Alexander are the biggest snubs for the Seahawks, and then Dave Brown very close behind them. Those are the biggest snubs to me that have not gotten into the Hall. Jacob Green was number 3 in sacks in the NFL when he retired. I think Jacob Green was a fantastic player, played a long time in Seattle. Was also really good against the run, a big guy that could play DT. He could play DN. So I've got him at number 2. At number 3, I'm going Michael Bennett. We'll get some modern flavor here. Michael Bennett made 3 Pro Bowls. He was on 2 Super Bowl teams. He was an outstanding run defender, had several years that he was close to double-digit sacks, and teams had to game plan for him because of his athleticism, his activity, and his motor. Just a guy that played to the whistle every single snap, and he was a nuisance to have to try to deal with his athleticism, how he made himself lean. So Michael Bennett at number 3 for me. At number 4, I'm going to go with Joe Nash, who should be in the Ring of Honor for the Seahawks, in my opinion. I still can't believe that he isn't. The guy played like 80 years in a Seahawks uniform, and he was really good during that time in Seattle. Didn't have a ton of sacks after 1 year where he broke out, where he was an all-pro, but he was a guy that was just really tough against the run, hard to move, and played much bigger than his size. So Joe Nash at number 4. And this, man, at number 5, this gets really tricky because if we're wanting to look at guys that are versatile, man, you know what? I'm going to go against the grain here a little bit. I'm going to go with Brandon Mebane. I'm going to stick with guys that played in the interior for the most part. And Brandon Mebane never had the sack numbers, but I don't know that there was a more invaluable guy on those Super Bowl teams than Brandon Mebane. One of the few holdovers they had from the pre-Pete Carroll era, played a long time, excellent teammate, and he had the belly roll dance move. You can't beat that. So there's my 5. I'm sure if you didn't put me in the spot and I did research, I might have some issues with my list, but there's my top 5. All right, Kevin Dante here for Rob. Any trade you see the Seahawks making? So I guess instead of just putting proposals, is there one player that stands out that you can say, you know what? I think there is a chance that Seattle might try to actually make this happen.
There's not any one player. You mentioned the name Jalen Ramsey, and of course, he is somebody who is kind of on the block with the Miami Dolphins. And I think that he would make some sense. I just love the idea of Seattle adding a playmaker, a physical corner. I just don't think that cornerback is quite as big of a concern as perhaps that we had talked about. And, our OTA conversation just yesterday kind of illustrated that point. I mean, Schwartz Charles was terrific. I'm expecting improvement from Nehemiah Pritchett, of course, in his second year as well. I am curious about defensive linemen because, as you just talked about, that Seattle has preferred to have another 5th edge rusher. So if there's somebody out there that would make some sense, similar to the way that the 49ers were able to to get Josh up from the Philadelphia Eagles, again, that would make some sense. Maybe it's a Jadeveon Clowney where you actually have to make a trade. You are just able to bring a player in. I also think the wide receiver is a position of concern for the Seahawks. So while I am not a huge Stephon Diggs fan, although I like boats myself, but at the same time, I just don't think that he necessarily is the greatest fit from a personality standpoint, but his skill set, I think, absolutely could make sense. So for some reason, the Seahawks felt like Stephon Diggs would be a good character fit for their club, then I think that he might be somebody that you would have to consider. I do think that wide receiver, again, is a position of concern, but I don't think that there's anything at the moment that is pressing. I think that the Seahawks are going to be able to walk into training camp and kind of just see what is happening on throughout the rest of the league and be in a position to take advantage if there is something that falls apart.
And speaking of trade talk, this question coming from Tony on Blue Sky. Did you see that Byron Murphy II liked the Instagram post linking Micah Parsons to the Seahawks as a trade candidate? Look, yes, I saw it. And I have learned, Rob, I will say this. I have learned that when players like things on social media in 2025, not to completely dismiss it. I have learned that. I learned my lessons with Russell Wilson a few years back. I think when guys do delete, they scrub their social media accounts. And sometimes there's really bad things going on behind the scenes. But listen, Byron Murphy II, I'm not putting too much stock in this. Like, if the Seahawks could get Micah Parsons, like, that is a move where I'm like, okay, I might be willing to give up a first rounder the next 2 years because he's that good. And you got to pay the contract. But I look at Seattle's edge and I'm like, look, I really like a lot of you guys, but I love Micah Parsons. That being said, I can't see Jerry Jones, for one thing. I can't see Jerry Jones like, you know what, I'm going to trade away the guy that's the best player of my entire team. I just can't see Jerry Jones. While he's done some dysfunctional things, I don't think he's that dysfunctional. So I don't see any trade happening on that front, even if Byron Murphy II really hopes that it does. I just don't see it. Now, if he becomes available, John Schneider certainly will not be quiet. He'll be ringing some phones if that happens. Okay, one more question for you here, Rob. And I know that this is actually a pretty good one here. Coming from NFL Draft 101, is competition good for a team, or is avoiding hurting your new QB's feelings more important? So I think that this is kind of putting a perspective, like, if Drew Lock is the better QB throughout the entire offseason and in training camp, like, do you reach a point where you say, like, we are in the business of winning football games, and does the team start to lean towards that other player? Or if Jalen Milroe becomes that guy, I just think it's a pretty good question.
I do think it's a good question. I am also going to kind of come back to a fairly simplistic response, and it's going to be the one that Herm Edwards made famous. I mean, you play to win the game, and so that to me is competition. Look, I mean, you want to start the best player. I feel very confident that as the OTAs, the training camps, the preseason, all that shakes out, that Sam Darnold is going to prove that he is the best player, that he is going to make the best decisions when he has got pressure in his face. I know that there is evidence that is not the case. There is plenty of evidence that is not the case with either Drew Lock or Jalen Milroe as well. But when they are protected, I think that Sam Darnold has the accuracy, the athletic ability, the poise in the pocket, all of the things that you're looking for to be that guy. But if it is Drew Lock that clearly seizes that job, if it's made Jalen Milroe that clearly seizes the job, then I'd like to think that John Schneider, that Mike Macdonald, that they recognize the fact that this is the NFL. And that you can't be protecting a player just for the benefit of that player's emotional, well-being, then win the damn game. And so that to me is why I do believe that Sam Darnold is the guy, but also why the Seahawks will absolutely take the best player rather than massaging somebody's ego.
When we come back, we are going to do a report card on state of the roster sense here. We're going to be looking at areas that still jump out to us as concerns as we head full steam ahead towards the start of training camp. You're listening to the Locked On Seahawks podcast. Welcome back to Locked On Seahawks. This is your host, Corbin Smith. Glad to be joined as always by my co-host in crime, Rob Rang. And a special thanks to each and every one of the 12s out there. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Seahawks your first listen 5 days a week. We greatly appreciate your support of the podcast. The Seahawks will be going into their last 2 open OTAs tomorrow and Thursday, and then they have minicamp next week. They actually just moved their mandatory minicamp up a week, so it'll be the 10th through the 12th instead of the 17th through the 19th. So that's all going to be coming up here. And after that point, they may have a few more OTAs they do after mandatory minicamp. They might just go into summer early. It all depends. But that means we are full steam ahead to training camp. Roster's pretty much set to this point. There may be an addition or two. Chidef and Cloudy could end up going some other route as well. But let's talk about maybe any concerns that we still have on this roster heading towards the regular season. And I know, talking to you before the show, there was one position from a depth perspective, and you kind of already touched on that a little bit, but I know there's one position that is at the top of your list right now.
For me, no question, it's wide receiver. Look, I think if Cooper Kupp and Jackson Smith-Njigba are healthy all year long, then you don't have to worry about wide receiver. What if they're not? And Cooper Kupp has struggled with durability throughout his NFL career. He was very durable in college. Jackson Smith-Njigba has been very durable in his NFL career. He struggled a little bit with durability in his college career. To me, Corbin, the drop-off between those two players and what is behind them, with all due respect to Marquez Valdes-Scantling or Jake Bobo or Cody White or whoever you want to throw out there, Seattle has several quality wide receivers that I think they get you through the season. But damn it, I'm looking for a Super Bowl at this point. And I think that the Seahawks have the horses to be able to do that. But if any of them go down, I do think that you are going to struggle here. And so that's, again, the position that I have the biggest area of concern. I'm a big fan of both the draft picks in the Seahawks selected this year, and Torrey Horton, Ricky White III. I was fans of them before Seattle drafted them. I'm even more fans of them based off the comments that I've had from Seahawks scouts, in the building, of course, watching these workouts and watching the way they're acclimating to their new teams here in the NFL. But at the same time, to me, you can talk about defensive line, you can talk about wide receiver, offensive line, you can talk about any other position that you want. To me, wide receiver is the possible Achilles heel, so to speak, of the Seahawks roster as it stands right now on June 3rd, 2025.
And I'm going to push back on that a little bit because I got to watch OTAs yesterday, and we have not gotten to see Torrey Horton yet more than just running routes. I'm excited about what he's going to bring to the equation. Ricky White III, I think, is going to do some really nice things for this football team. I'm with you. I like both draft picks. But there is a guy, and listen, last week we had our roster projections, and I didn't have this guy on the roster. And as soon as we got done recording the episode, I'm like, that's the one pick I regret because I just don't think he's going to give up that roster spot easy. And dang it, Jake Bobo goes out and catches 2 touchdown passes in the first OTA. Jake Bobo he is that guy that just does not go away. He is always going to be ready to compete. And he's just a guy, when he gets his opportunities, he makes the most of them. He always has. So I see Jake Bobo out there. I see Cody White catch a couple touchdown passes yesterday. He's kind of like, hey, you forget about me? I had a huge game against the Rams last year. Like, I can play the game. Derek Young had 3 touchdowns, but 2 of them were called back because of interference penalties or holds. So there was a hold in an OTA. I've never seen that before. But Derek Young is a guy that was showing up and looked like the route running was better. And then you've got Marquez Valdes-Scantling that caught a beautiful throw from Drew Lock, and you can see his speed. I don't know that I'm as down on the depth. In fact, I'm just intrigued to see who gets a roster spot from that group, because I think that you've got a very competitive group of 4, 5, 6 guys. And I'm going to throw one more name in there, Rob. Tyrone Broden Jr., who is the undrafted rookie from Arkansas. He caught a touchdown yesterday and nearly hauled in a second one. He did get intercepted after it bounced off his hands, but it was an extremely difficult catch. But you got to see him catch his touchdown from Sam Darnold, and he was actually working with the first-team offense a little bit. And he's got size. He's got 4.3 speed. He could be a player that if you can just get more consistency from him as a pass catcher, he has all the physical tools, and he's a good special teams player. So I just rattled off 5 or 6 names that might be playing for 3 spots. and it is going to be incredibly competitive. I'm not saying you can't add to that group, but Steven Sims had a couple nice catches yesterday. They've got some pieces there. For me, my biggest concern is actually it's the same it has been for the last month. It is the depth on the defensive line, just across the defensive line. That is what worries me the most. And I've actually gotten a little bit of a glimpse of what this could look like because Uchenna Nwosu was not out there yesterday. DeMarcus Lawrence was not out there yesterday, and Tyreek Smith was not practicing yesterday. So the edges, you had Boye Mafe and Derek Hall, and then after that, it was Jamie Sheriff and a bunch of undrafted guys. That, if you have to play with an injury or two in that group, there's a big drop-off with what you're going to have there. And then in the interior, you've got Leonard Williams, Jaron Reed, Byron Murphy, and then after that, it turns into Mike Morris and a couple other guys there, like especially the nose tackle position. Jonathan Hankins wasn't practicing yesterday, so you had Brandon Peely and Quentin Bohanna as your nose tackles. Like, I just think there needs to be a couple moves there to add some more beef and depth to their D-line. Getting a healthy Riley Mills back would help a lot, but they may not have him till the middle of the season. And if you don't add another edge and you're having to rely on Tyreek Smith or Jamie Sheriff as your number 5 guy or Connor O'Toole, whoever they try to plug in there, they get a lot lighter, they get a lot less experienced, and it really creates questions for me, especially in this defense that they like to move guys around and do a lot of rotations. Again, that's why Jadeveon Clowney just makes too much sense to me for both parties, but especially with what they need right now. I have concerns about the depth there. The starters are great, but you mentioned the injuries at receiver. What if Byron Murphy goes down? Or what if Lawrence or Nwosu, who've had injuries, what if those guys go down? And I just mentioned some of the names you might have to be playing a lot of snaps. That's where my concern lies right now still.
Yeah, no, I think that's very fair. I think those are the two positions of concern. I would add cornerback to that group. I do think that is a position of concern for the Seahawks. I think that my concern is lessened since the draft and just having some conversations with the Seahawks scouts that they do feel pretty good about some of the young talent. I mean, specifically Nehemiah Pritchard. They feel like he's a future starter in the NFL. So I am intrigued to kind of see his development. I love the fact that you mentioned Tariq Young. To me, he is one of those players, the wide receiver position, and your kind of rebuttal at the wideout that sometimes I forget about. And I just need to see more actual plays. I mean, there's no doubt that he's physically as impressive as it gets. I just want to see more actual big plays. I want to see him become a little bit more of the Cody White of the Jake Bobo, because as you said, Jake Bobo doesn't go away. It's true. He doesn't run away either. And this is an offense that I want to see more receivers that can break free and create a big play. That's been so much of what Clint Kubiak's offense has always been about. And what Sam Darnold, frankly, is relying on. I don't expect the Seahawks offense to, just to lead the NFL in big plays. I expect them to kind of work their way down the field and rely on the running game. And so to your point before about the edge rushers and the defensive line, I think that there is a concern about the 4th or 5th or 6th guys along that point. I think there's concerns about the 3rd guy at the wide receiver position. And frankly, you're going to be playing an awful lot of wide receivers, throughout the course of the season. So if you're going to be relying on rookies, and I think we have to throw in Elijah Arroyo in this, as well as Torrey Horton, Ricky White. Again, it's just the sample set of guys that actually help a team that's good. Just extend into Super Bowl roles as day 3 selections as far as the clear wide receivers, Ricky White and Torrey Horton. It's just such a small example of where guys actually can do that. And so that's why I do have some concerns. I think the Seahawks need another guy on defensive line, but I think that they need a guy even more at the wide receiver position, preferably a guy that can run away and make big plays on his own.
This may be the first time in Locked On Seahawks history that we've gotten to this stage of the offseason and we never mentioned the offensive line. Yeah. And, it's probably because there's not a lot of options to add in. Look, you've invested all this draft capital. It's time to coach these guys up. So I don't have the concerns there. I got to see the guys play on the field and actually live up to it. But as far as like actual needs wanting to go get somebody right now, O-line's not a position where you're going to have like a really good starter just suddenly become available either. Like that just doesn't happen. There's scarcity. So But again, this might be the first time we've ever done that. And that's good news for the Seattle Seahawks going into the 2025 season. There really is some warranted optimism, at least, coming out of that offensive line room with John Benton coaching up all of these youngsters headlined by first-round pick Gray Zabel. As always, you can follow me on X and Blue Sky at Corbin Smith NFL. You can follow Rob at Rob Rang. And make sure to follow Locked On Seahawks. Subscribe on YouTube or wherever you listen to your podcast to make sure you don't miss a single episode. For our diehard Seahawk fans, make sure to check out the Emerald City Spectrum. And I botched this yesterday, and a couple of you called me out on email, so I am going to apologize to you. It is not Father's Day for the code. The code is Fathers. 50% off on your annual subscription. We have that Father's Day sale through June 15th, so make sure to check that out at emeraldcityspectrum.com. All Seattle sports all the time. Coming up tomorrow, we're going to have a very special guest joining us in the midst of OTAs as we continue to learn more about Seattle's draft picks on and off the field. You won't want to miss it. Enjoy the rest of your Tuesday. Go Hawks.